Kunitsu-Gami, Path of the Goddess, is a phenomenal game. The visuals, the soundtrack, the premise, the gameplay, and even the narrative, what little of it there is, just hits in all the right ways. Demons, known as Seethe, take over the holy mountain Kofuku, destroying towns and hunting down villagers, and you work to take back the mountain one locale at a time, freeing the villagers, fixing up the place, and restoring the land to what it was. Gameplay-wise, Kunitsu-Gami is a mix of tower defense, hack and slash, and RTS. The villagers you rescue can be assigned roles. They don a certain ceremonial mask, transitioning from a cowardly pedestrian into a courageous warrior, gaining the power of one of the 12 divine generals. In this powered-up state, they act as both units in battle you can control, and as towers, essentially. In a boss fight, for instance, you can order them to all-out attack, or rush back and defend, but in a regular level, you'll place them in areas and let them go to work, attacking enemies in their range, holding down choke points, or providing a buff, and so on. Position them as you would if you were playing any other tower defense game, high up vantage points for long-range units, melee guys in the front, and etc. While during the night you'll need to fend off waves of demons, the conversely serene and peaceful daytime sections is where you'll plan, collect, and organize. Rescue villagers from their Seethe cocoons, purify parts of the map, maybe find a chest or two to acquire some resources, cleanse some animals by whacking them like a piñata, and of course, chart Yoshiro's path forward. Yoshiro needs to reach the Torii gates to purify them. She's the most important piece of returning the land to its former state, ridding the mountain of its demon infestation, but she can only move so far in one day. Halt her progress in a tactical position, maybe behind a wall or other environmental advantage, so you can better protect her during the night, while the miasma of death and sin seek to take her down at all costs. She's your fail state. If you've ever played tower defense games before, you know you're allowed so many ticks of damage to your home base before you lose, but here, it's a little different. In the former, a foe merely walking past the crucial threshold would be enough to see your health drop, but in Kunitsu-Gami, the Seethe don't just disappear. They attack Yoshiro, and will keep wailing away until she's dead. Furthermore, Yoshiro's transient nature, the game requiring you to keep pushing her towards the spawn point of the threat we're trying to protect her from, means you'll need to be more tactical and flexible than you might otherwise. The save and checkpoint system is quite forgiving, but ignoring that, doing everything you can to keep Yoshiro alive might mean moving troops around, changing which ones you have out to fit the current situation, or attempting to plug up the holes in your defense with Soh themselves. Soh is the samurai you control, the seemingly genderless protector of Yoshiro. Along with the units you unlock slowly throughout the game, you'll also unlock more abilities and upgrades for Soh, if you choose to spend your materials that way anyway. Soh being the protector of Yoshiro matches quite well, as both have an elegance to them, a graceful dance-like nature to their movements. Yoshiro's approach to and cleansing of the Torii gates, and Soh's offensive moves, their slashes and dodges. The designers talked about how traditional Japanese dancing is very upper body focused, the feet don't move as much, and that really comes through with Yoshiro especially. The emphasis on twisting motions was felt much more with Soh. Basically every action they perform sees their body or sword artfully swirling around in complete control. It's as deadly as it is delicate and precise. Controlling Soh, taking out the hordes of foes, feels great on its own, and I think that's one of the big reasons this hooked me as much as it did early on. I seem to love genre mashups, Yoku's Island Express, for instance, being a very inventive one, but where this trend is most obvious with me is the tower defense genre. I do like the genre, but it's not one I find myself wanting more of. I don't finish one only to get excited for another. I find them interesting and engaging when I'm in the right mood, but clearly something about them doesn't excite me enough to click play on a brand new iteration. However, when you add something else to it, that seems to do the trick. Gunhouse is a puzzler mixed with tower defense, one that I already covered in a video hardly anybody has seen, and X-Morph Defense, one I'd love to talk about more in depth one day, mixes twin-stick shooting into the formula. Kunitsu-Gami feels closer to the latter than the former, and really, I'm a bit amazed I've never seen a game tackle this mashup, Dynasty Warriors plus Tower Defense, since both deal with a large number of enemies on screen at once, and both let you, eventually anyway, play out a power fantasy, mowing down dozens of foes at a time. The balance Capcom managed to strike is as fine as the edge of Soh's blade. There are times when you can clear out an entire group without much of a problem, but there's also the many, many unique and far more dangerous Seethe that all have ways to make your life more difficult, normally coming with a larger health bar to boot, making a one-on-one fight take far longer than with the fodder, but also there's multiple spawn points for the demons and paths for them to take. No matter what way you slice it, until you get sufficiently overpowered near the endgame and the beginning of New Game Plus, careful consideration of your units, both where to place them and what type they are, is very necessary, as is placing Yoshiro in a sensible location and choosing which environmental structures to build during the daytime sections. Damage-boosting auras, barriers to slow the demons down, high vantage points for range units, cannons that feature a cooldown, traps, and so on. Their rigid positioning plays into the multiple entrances for the Seethe as well, as the secondary gate isn't always in the same location. The one Yoshiro has to cleanse, at the back of the level, will always release enemies, but there's usually at least a couple potential usable gates on different sides of the map. Exploring the terrain in the daytime portion clues you in on which ones will activate at night, and they aren't set in stone. One night might be one, and the next might be another, or retrying the entire map sees it be the third unexpectedly. There's also plenty of levels where many more than two are possible, and it alternates between them as the night goes on. This not only keeps you on your toes, forcing you into thinking tactically instead of relying on your overarching strategy at night, it also aids replayability. Even the slight switch-up of a different spawn point is enough to make you change your plans, which in turn injects the game with variety, calling you to come back and try again. After successfully completing the level, like in many others of the genre, you'll be shown the optional challenges, which unlock some upgrade materials, musubi, when accomplished. If you manage to do these on the first try without realizing it, since you won't know what they are until you're already done, it still counts, but some contradict each other, which encourages a player to go back in and play a different way. For instance, in the first Pitch Black level, where your units can't attack demons that aren't in a light source, there's a challenge for activating all the lanterns, and one for having none of them lit. This, in addition to New Game Plus, which opens the floodgates of bringing in late-game, more difficult enemies into earlier levels, along with carrying over all of your upgrades, shows how confident Capcom were with this gameplay loop. Would players really want to play Kunitsu-Gami this much? Well, yes, actually, since it's amazing. If all that wasn't enough, each time you complete a level, that area you just fought through becomes a base. You assign the villagers you rescued there, the ones that helped off to fight the demons in that location, to fix up the ruined structures. There's a day-night timer at the bottom, and initially I thought it to be a superfluous addition, since nighttime didn't trigger enemies, and daytime isn't your timer for the base portion. Advancing time doesn't cause anything to happen, but that's the beauty, isn't it? Nothing happens. We've saved this village. This is now a sanctuary free of demons. It's a lovely reminder that you're actually having an impact on this game world, this mountain. In these bases, besides giving scratchies to the wildlife, making villagers dance with a certain talisman equipped, checking out the lore of the Seethe and humans at the Emma plaque board, and choosing which structure to repair next, you'll also be visiting Yoshiro. This is where you'll upgrade your units, change your gear, learn about Japanese sweets, even giving some to Yoshiro for her to eat, and save your game. I love the need to visit these formerly rescued areas of the mountain, as even though you're still interacting with the menu to some degree, it grounds it a bit more than it would otherwise. Plus, these vacations from the core gameplay offer some of the most relaxing and heavenly music you'll hear in the game. It's more than a sense of calm before the storm, it gives the impression that there won't even be a storm. This is how life should be, quiet and peaceful. The soundtrack in the other areas of the game is arguably even better, and it fittingly sounds like the polar opposite of these safe room-esque tracks. First of all, the lead up to the nighttime in the real levels is phenomenal. You're already pressed for time, trying your best to get as many crystals as you can, find and purify all of the defilement things, repair the structures you'll want to use, open the chests, collect all the villagers, Meanwhile, the sun never stops setting. What seemed like so much time turned into barely any at all, and every step of the way, the accompanying sound matches your increased anxiety levels. Then, once the night truly starts, we get the opening percussion, and all hell starts to break loose, literally. The bombastic battle theme never got old for me, and it's still stuck in my head even today, while I'm writing this as midnight hits on January 1st of 2025. I hear fireworks outside, but that's nothing compared to the fireworks inside, the drums of the night proudly echoing through my head. It's such an outstanding piece, since it truly sounds like a song of war, used to inspire us to fight long into the night. The audio designers talked about wanting to impart a sense of contrast onto the player, a tug-of-war between the two factions. The humanistic element of the villagers and the mountain, which is more acoustic, versus the digital and chaotic noise for the Seethe. They pulled it off tremendously, since you can clearly hear both sides fighting for dominance as the battle goes on, the corrupted Torii Gates and Seethe themselves attempting to drown out the score with their haunting growls and yells. Yet, they're ultimately in vain, as they add to the wall of noise without ever stripping the song of its purpose, to provide audible backup for the fight against Hell. This game is filled with great details, but one related to the musical component is the purification of the demon gates. Kunitsu-Gami does a wonderful job of interweaving community into its gameplay, visuals, and even audio. Sure, the Path of the Goddess is the subtitle to this game, Yoshiro and Soh are the most important parts to all of this, but the villagers, the animals, and nature itself are vital pieces of the puzzle, helping out in their own ways. Purifying the defilement in the land heals the surrounding flora, and gives you the crystals you need to keep playing the game. The animals provide rations, your only healing item when cleansed, and afterwards they seem to hang out around Yoshiro, showing the connection between goddess and wildlife. This is also why I'm more than happy to see a pet dog button, which the cynical side of me always views as a cheap way to get some attention and an extra sale or two, but here it actually connects. You're a part of this healing process, you're the reason these critters are normal again. Absolutely pet that dog, that cat, and that snake? It all has a place. These animals help you as much as you help them. The carpenter seems to exist regardless of Soh and Yoshiro, as his hilarious introduction where he just falls out of thin air goes to show. He's a part of this too. He repairs your defenses. Without him, protecting Yoshiro would be a lot more difficult. The villagers you rescue, your units in battle, build up the mountain again. They rebuild the villages, they remove blockades during the daytime, even construct bridges. They don the ceremonial masks and take on whichever role you assign them, giving their lives in boss battles. And they're even a part of the gate purifications, joining in on the chant and dance alongside Soh and Yoshiro. Heck, the carpenter is here too! It's such an uplifting visual, seeing everyone work together to fight back this evil, and being able to hear it makes it all the better. When writing for this video, I came across the Making Of series on YouTube, going into detail about the creation process for Kunitsu-Gami. There's a lot of really interesting behind-the-scenes footage and insight. I'd recommend watching it in full, but something that really surprised me was how unorthodox their approach to creating this game was. The director insisted on using miniatures for the setting, scanning them in, and then using CG to fill in some of the gaps. He said it helped with the faraway camera angle, and they wanted players to feel like they're moving through a diorama. Funny enough, they said the creation of the shrine we see at the beginning and end of the game was the toughest, the roof they ended up constructing out of dried out coffee grounds. This took them 2.5 to 3 months to make. Quite a lot of effort for something we won't see much in the game. The visual effects, the emphasis on fireworks and explosions, those were all done practically. Every animation we see was motion captured, incredibly I will add. Every garment of clothing was tailored in real life. Every sweet you can let Yoshiro eat was actually cooked and scanned in. The music was recorded outside in a lot of cases. They even wanted to bring a piano out into the forest, but realized that would be too difficult of a task, so they played the track through speakers and re-recorded it on a microphone in the woods instead. This is such a profoundly interesting game, with clear passion put into it at every stage of production, its authenticity endearing as it is remarkable, and while you might not consciously realize all the work that went into it, the details are felt. Walking around these levels felt intimate, like I was exploring a real place, because I kind of was. No, this wasn't modeled after any specific Japanese town or village, but it does physically exist in the world in miniature form. The diorama feels alive, just like they wanted. The outfits are all extravagant and flow well with the tight animation. The special effects and explosions resemble fireworks and impart a sense of spectacle, even in the misery that is this fight against the Seethe. The music is phenomenal full stop, and I'll have more to say on that front when we get to the bosses, but just, wow, what a complete package Kunitsu-Gami is. Every tower defense has an assortment of towers, level gimmicks, and enemies to throw at the player, so Kunitsu-Gami isn't leading the renaissance in that department or anything, but the variety and pacing feels really great all the way to the finish line. You begin with the woodcutter, a basic melee unit. Archers, the basic ranged unit, are up next, and I love the sheer excitement on display as they dry fire their bows when being created. I know a thing or two about archery, and yeah, that's not good for the bow, to transfer that energy back into it. Hey, this is a magical land with magical rules, so let's not ruin this Chad or Stacy's parade and live and let live. The ascetic slows enemies down, but not continuously. He has a radius, and every now and then will clamp them tight, turning the demons orange and halting their movement significantly. You can eventually upgrade him so that the slowdown effect itself also deals a slight amount of damage. Pair them with melee units and they can hold down a choke point fairly well. As much as I abandoned them in the late game, they're definitely one I used more than most during my time, and them negating enemy attacks now and then makes them valuable even in New Game Plus during some levels. The Thief is the 4th unit you'll unlock, and they're useful in the daytime sections. Assign them to a buried chest and they'll dig it out for you. Eventually you can upgrade them to unlock locked doors, but I only remember seeing them show up in the final 2 or so levels, so it's not that important early on, yeah. But at least their upgrades grant more crystals and rations from open chests, so they manage to be worth it in the end. Upgrade them all the way, and they'll run around at night collecting crystals for you. They have no self-preservation instinct though, they'll run towards crystals without a thought, even into the poison waters. Nice. Honestly, not super helpful. An extra offensive body at night is more valuable. These guys interact with the crystal economy in a, well, different way. I'm not sure how interesting it is, but it's worth keeping in mind. Since they're basically useless in the nighttime sections, it's usually better to swap them to a different class before the battle resumes. Not all villager roles cost the same, however, so while yes, swapping from an archer or woodcutter might cost 100 crystals in total, 50 for the switch to the thief, and 50 for the switch back to woodcutter or archer, if you downgraded a more costly unit, such as the ascetic or even a sumo, that's a huge blunder, a complete waste of crystals. You better hope the chests you opened with them are worth it. The sumo wrestler is one of the most expensive units in the game, tied only with the ninja and sorcerer at 300, 6 times the cost of a regular woodchopper. Interestingly enough, he's also the one that introduces the gender dynamics. Only villagers with the turtle symbol can be sumos, while the fish symbol villagers can't. You might not have even realized it before the sumo, but sure enough, some villagers are male and others female. It's, at a glance, a seemingly insignificant detail that really only adds a bit of backstory to some characters when in the bases, and makes it a bit more tedious when assigning roles to the villagers you save, but it connects with something I'll talk about a bit later on that, I think, is pretty clever. The Sumo is a vital unit. Even in New Game Plus, I found myself making at least one during tough missions, since he distracts and lures enemies to him. He has high health and is a hard-hitting boy for enemies on the ground. The Shaman is the counterpart to the Sumo, as only fish-symboled villagers can take on this role. She acts as a healer, though her radius is quite small when unupgraded. She demands a lot of attention at base form, moving her to wherever she's needed at a moment's notice, but it's worth it depending on the level. Rations are your only healing item, which you can use for you or on the villagers, so if you're running low, or are doing a challenge where you can't use any, she can help keep everyone alive. Her final ability unlock being bringing back cocooned villagers when she dies near them. It sounds neat, but much like a certain class we'll talk about later, that's an awful lot of upgrade materials to spend on something that isn't as helpful as, say, another marksman. Spearmen are the medium enemy melee fighters, slower, but their hits are stronger. They can't give chase to any demon that gets past them, but they do a much better job on the larger threats. The same goes for the marksman, an improved archer essentially. Their rifle shots are much stronger than the archer's arrows, but take longer to reload. More damage, less frequency, and there are cases where a barrage of arrows is the way to go, but man, this is the unit that seems pretty close to being busted. They have longer range than the archers, and deal enough damage to wipe away nearly any Seethe's health bar out within moments. Getting a clump of these guys in the right spots is enough sometimes. They certainly aren't the cheapest unit to buy, and some environments seem designed to counter them, but I can't pretend they aren't dominant in most situations. Conversely, the Priest, the next role you acquire, is the worst unit in the game. Look up any tier list for the villager roles and Priest will be at the bottom, usually in its own category. Upgraded, sure, it's cool that he can cleanse toxic pools away. That would have been helpful in some scenarios if I had him early enough to spend the Musubi to unlock that power, yeah. But the only thing the base version of the Priest can do is dispel enhancements from Seethe. He can remove the blue fire effect that makes them faster and stronger. This gets applied by a certain buff master Seethe, and only on a handful of occasions, I think a single level, do demons come out of the gate with the effects without the buff master. I can certainly see the results, but it's such a specific niche as hell ability to remove a demon buff, one that really only sees use when the New Game Plus challenge objectives ask for it. It's simply not worth sacrificing another offensive weapon for this guy. I'd say give him the Toxic Pool Cleanse at his base form, or at the very least, drastically reduce the Musubi required to upgrade him. Not only is he not worth hogging up a villager body, nor is he worth the crystals to turn a villager into the priest, he's also not worth the Musubi you'd spend on upgrading him. Just a sad case all around. I wish they had thought about this guy a little more. I can definitely think of times where freeing a villager caught under the possession of the Kunitsu-Gami would have been immensely helpful, but that's 5, 10, 20, 10, 15, 30... That's 90 Musubi spent on making this dork almost worth the crystals spent to create him. Ugh, what a way to go. The Cannoneer has a shotgun for a ranged weapon, basically. It can hit hard and get multiple smaller enemies at once, but has less range and a longer reload, like it's really long. They're nice additions, definitely helpful in certain levels, and this is the case where I can see how useful they are even without being upgraded. In New Game Plus, they're still a decent choice even without their 2 big skills unlocked. Plus, their attacks have firework visuals, which is a real treat. The Sorcerer doesn't attack or defend, instead they charge up a Spirit Bomb for you. The length of time it takes for the power to become available varies by how many of them you created and how upgraded they are, but they'll mostly stand in one place for the whole night, not offering any offensive help or buffs of any kind. But once they're done with their incantation, you can launch a screen wipe attack, killing all Seethe in the area. It is a bit ridiculous that it launches a minute-long cutscene, though. If there wasn't a skip cutscene button, this would have been one of the dumbest decisions in the game. But even with the option to blow past the visual, it still strikes me as odd. No way on earth are people watching this lengthy sorcerer scene more than maybe twice. The final villager role is one of my favorites, the Ninja. They act independently. They'll roam around the battlefield, teleporting behind enemy lines, only to dart back once they've killed their prey. Since they can toss knives at range, they can assist with the flying Seethe as well, making them even more worth their asking price. I think they're fun companions, since they resemble Soh so much, but keeping them alive can be tricky since they don't stay in one place and rush into danger so often, and they're one of the most expensive units of all, for good reason. They mix well with the shamans, but I will admit, out of all of the units in the game, these are the least towery of the bunch. But since the RTS and hack and slash components of the game are just as solid as the tower defense, it doesn't feel out of place or unbalanced. Speaking of that, I should discuss the combat with Soh before moving to the enemies. There's two styles of melee, but both follow the same button patterns for their attacks: Y, XY, XXY, XXXY. Every Y button press can also be held down for a charge attack, eventually anyway, when Soh is upgraded. The Oka dance style is what you'll start with, and I imagine is what most players will stick with all the way through to the end. Oka's advantage is covering distance and has a quantity over quality feel to it. Every additional X button press extends the length of the final flourish, and that goes three ways: time spent in the combo overall, slashes dished out, and potential ground gained. I say potential since you can circle around and focus on a single foe. Oka Dance also comes with a Rise attack, which is fantastic for clearing out a batch of flying enemies. When you unlock the power to upgrade Soh themselves, you can choose to learn the other attack style, Shiden Dance. If Oka is more concerned with movement and flow, Shiden is about dealing higher damage at the sacrifice of movement, quality over quantity. Soh is mostly stationary for every combo, so if you start your chain too far away, or a boss or regular enemy is on the move, you'll likely whiff. Since they sheathe and unsheathe their sword for every swing, even a basic weak attack to clear out crystal growths in the day, it takes a little longer at the start. There's a slight delay. Add on the fact that every combo in this stance basically looks the same, only the 3-hit combo sees Soh slash an extra time at the end. It's mostly just the damage increasing on the final swings. It's hard to come to grips with early on. It feels different, almost clunky, and initially I wasn't a fan. Now though, I think I prefer it. It feeling so different turned into a positive, as it made my New Game Plus run, after I decided to switch over permanently, a lot more fun. I'm now appreciative of the tricky learning curve of the higher damage dealing dance, since it made things feel fresh again. It also pairs wonderfully with the charge function. You can hold the last button of the combo to gain power, and boy howdy was that practically necessary in the final stage of the game in New Game Plus. When it comes to a single beefy enemy, I'll take Shiden Dance all day at this point. Both styles share the same levels of commitment to their respective combos, and that sort of feeds into what Kunitsu-Gami is at its heart. What I mean is, you can't interrupt your animation with a defensive move once you press the Y button to begin the flourish, no blocking or dodging. There's a degree of risk versus reward here, since, especially with the Oka dance style, the final swings take a decent length of time, yet they're the most powerful. Charging up the Y button swing takes time too, also leading to more damage. This matches really well with the genre this hack-and-slash combat is being mashed up with, tower defense. Because Soh is mostly used to plug the gaps in your defense, and you might need to rush back to Yoshiro at a moment's notice, choosing to go with the stronger combo when far away is a bit of a gamble. A recurring question might arise in your head: should I focus on taking out these strong foes at the risk of not being prepared to sprint back if needed? There's a surprising amount of mechanics and actions related to defense. You have a dodge maneuver and a block, and the latter has two alterations. Pressing block at the right time turns it into a parry, which means your resist gauge doesn't go down, and pressing strong attack after you successfully block a demon swipe produces a counter-strike. I hear you can perform this move while parrying, but I found the timing to be very difficult to parse. On top of all this is the resist gauge, which you and every enemy has alongside your health. It functions similarly to the posture system from Sekiro. When yours depletes from blocking too many attacks in quick succession, you'll be vulnerable, and this goes double for the enemy. Certain moves drain their resist gauge more than others, and once it's all the way down, they're open for a critical strike of sorts, an extremely damaging stab. Along with the melee, you unlock a bow later on, which comes with its own powers like explosions, teleportation, piercing, or slowdown. Regular shots have a cooldown period though, making it not as immediately effective as the rising attack in my experience. This helps keep Soh limited in battle, a point I'll talk about more soon, and it lets the rising combo continue to have a purpose, even into the late game, 2 birds with 1 arrow. The teleportation bow variant is mostly helpful for getting secrets and objectives in the daytime sections, but you can use it to warp over to enemies, even doing a downward slash once in the air. That said, I wouldn't recommend using it in the boat levels, as it will indeed let you warp to the Hirafuge, and you can stand on it, but then you're stuck. You can't jump back. It seems like there's an invisible wall, likely there to prevent you from jumping out of the boat in the first place. Yeah, a bit of a shame, but it is rather funny. You'll also unlock more and more Tsuba guards as you go, which are special moves, ranging from a very powerful ground strike, an aerial swirl, placeable mines, a spirit doppelganger that'll do every action you do, and a protection dome, and there's plenty of talismans that buff your offense in many ways, or make moves easier, like extending the window on counter-strikes. As you can see, there's just as much depth on offer with the hack and slash portion of the game, if not more, as there is with the tower defense. The amount of customization, special moves, mechanics, and attack variety on display resembles something you'd expect from a traditional linear action title, but instead it's jammed into a game where it's only half of the focus. It'd be an impressive feat even if it wasn't executed well, but it is. Soh feels smooth as silk to control, and the melee fighting on its own is robust and satisfying. That said, there was a clear effort made to make sure that soloing everything isn't always the way to go, especially in the beginning. Along with the high commitment to your swings, your dodge can't be spammed. You get invulnerability on the whole animation, but there's a big delay at the end. This confused me at first, and got on my nerves, but now is not a problem at all. You're not meant to abuse the iframes like it's Bayonetta or Dark Souls 3, you have to be thoughtful with your movements and not panic dodge at every bad situation. Blocking also isn't always the way to go either. Your resist gauge will go down, and some enemy attacks can't be blocked altogether. Even if at times you can solo everything, especially in New Game Plus, where they'll sometimes ask that of you as an optional objective, Soh's moveset, while buttery smooth, feels intentionally limited in some areas, so you don't over-rely on it. Someone could easily talk about the Tsuba guards for quite a while, the special moves you can unlock and equip for Soh, but there's only one I wanted to mention. The protection barrier, which creates a dome around Soh, points to it being most effective for when Seethe are coming close to Yoshiro, or at the very least protecting you and your villagers from harm for a while. That's what the little video thing shows when you select it even. However, since it can't be penetrated by enemies at all, they bounce off of it, it's fun to use at a choke point or even right next to a gate, locking a few enemies in a chain reaction of ramming into the damage-dealing wall over and over. It's a barrel of laughs, effectively trolling the enemy with this defensive move, using it offensively instead. The specific enemies, the Seethe themselves, are varied and interesting, but it did raise a question in my head. How much do you, as a player, value when a game spices things up until the very end? It's nice when you can play something in its entirety and still get surprised by new enemies, weapons, or characters, even though you're practically finished with the game. It can help it from getting stale and feeling stagnant. But on the other hand, depending on how major or interesting those late-game additions are, a conversation about underutilization is bound to prop up. The Nurikabe, the Seethe enemy that, when they lose half their health, creates a giant wall against Soh, but a ramp for its fellow demons to leap over obstacles, is simply fantastic. The visual design is creepy, almost haunting in a way, and him being mostly for utility genuinely makes this guy feel different from the rest, but it shows up so late that it doesn't get as much room to leave an impression. There's fewer moments where he can bamboozle you, and by then you're already close to, if not already, overpowered as hell, depending on how you upgraded Soh and the villager roles. It doesn't get a lot of screen time, and the screen time it gets is lessened due to your current offensive capabilities and expertise with the game's many systems. This is also why New Game Plus isn't the perfect answer either. I did enjoy going through New Game Plus and the extra objectives they threw my way, but the difficulty increase of throwing any and all Seethe at you, at random it felt like, early on, doesn't feel equivalent to your opening hours with less equipment and villager roles. I think a good balance would have been to disable a couple of roles for each New Game Plus level, or maybe even reduce how many villagers are in each stage. Sure, you might not get some of your favorite combinations, but it feels a little too easy to rely on the clear best of the bunch so often. The objectives for the priest and sorcerer and so on were welcome, but the finish before X Day ones weren't as much, since it's encouraging you to play at your best, which means marksman and Soh dominating everything. There is a hint of limitation, even if unintended, given that you won't be granted the giant crystal bonuses between levels any longer. The stage right after the ones where Soh is in spirit form is where this is felt the most, as you may be near empty in your crystal reserves after using all of them to save Yoshiro. This caused me to rely on cheaper alternatives in the next stage, and that's awesome, but those were few and far between. The last couple of levels are decently challenging again, more than the base game even, but everything before it practically feels like a victory lap. Besides spamming the very best all the time, it would have been interesting to have to make do with wood choppers as your only melee, or archers as your only ranged again. It would make things a bit harder, and might allow some late-game enemies more room to breathe. For instance, I did manage to get great footage of the Nurikabe in his wall form, overriding my barrier, but this was me letting that happen. I regularly had to hold back to see some of the fun scenarios play out that I didn't encounter much up to that point. That's one of the costs, I suppose, when adding in so many things. The later villager roles didn't see as much attention, since how could they? And the later enemies don't show up as often, since how could they? This ultimately comes down to the question of, did you appreciate that moment when yet another new Seethe came to ruin your day that first time? Or was that moment not that impactful, and you'd rather see the cool enemy more often? Anyway, I won't be talking about every Seethe in depth, only a few. I have to mention the basic crawling demon guys, the Gaki, the fodderest of the fodder, since, truly, they're adorable to me. As of writing this, my daughter is 11 months old, and she just learned to crawl last month, and has since been scooting around and causing chaos. Not really, but it's funny to say, she's the cutest thing ever. When she crawls with a purpose, she often sticks her tongue out, and that's all I can see when I look at these guys now. I'm sure the intent wasn't to frighten players by any means with these designs, but this one in particular is cute, and I love it. The Shokara are one of the trickier enemies to fight one-on-one, as they have exaggerated animations, making them a bit more difficult to properly time a parry if need be, and they leap high in the air, just long enough for you to think that you're wasting time worrying about them, perhaps so long that it causes you to try and work on something else, maybe even start up another attack animation, and then they land on your face. Classic. Their attacks are well telegraphed though, if you keep your ears open. Sure, their movements are intentionally deceitful, but they come attached with distinct audio cues, always warning you of the incoming danger. Their lore Emma plaque is a bit horrifying, but I suppose that goes for most of the Seethe in the game.
The Shokara leap from great heights to attack their prey. Even the strongest armor is no match for their sharp claws. Legend states that on the night of Koshin, occurring once every 60 days, a god transformed into a Seethe after passing punishment upon the slumbering humans for the sins they had committed. It has now become a custom for people to gather together and stay awake throughout the long nights the Shokara are said to appear. Often weddings and parties. Have you seen those moves?
What, did he really just say that? I mean, he's right, but... Anyway, definitely one of the sillier guys in terms of visuals, but they're lovable goofballs, and I won't have anyone slandering them in my video. While most all of the demon designs are striking in their own twisted way, giving reason to let their models be rewards to unlock and view at the home bases, one that stood out was the blind samurai, Shinku-Samurai. At a glance, you can see all the katanas lodged into his head, a great silhouette for a basic humanoid guy, but looking closer, you can see all of the faces his face contains. The lore found within the game tells a story about this folklore demon, and this is one of the more fun explanations, since it doesn't really explain anything.
There once was a samurai who swung his sword at all of those in his path, regardless of friend or foe. His life came to an end one night when he was taken down in his sleep. Legend says the corpse left behind was merely a collection of faces, with no way to tell which one was the true face of the samurai. Even in death, the samurai's lust for blood is unyielding, and it can be found roaming the mountains at night. A sword, pulled from its own head, in hand.
Where most of the Seethe stories are how the demon came to be, usually rooted in human sin in some shape or form, this one feels different. The way it's written gives it some wiggle room to potentially convey that this guy was the demon the whole time. If he was blindly swinging his sword before his death, and moments after his corpse had many faces, I don't know, maybe this fucked up dude just is. Shinku-Samurai is and always was. The information about each of the Seethe was interesting initially, but it did get a little repetitive. They sort of need to be similar, given that they're all supposedly born of human sin somehow, but still, I can't deny, my interest started to wane as I kept going. Some of them are so randomly cruel and unusual, it's hard not to simply think, oh, okay, well, fuck off. A good example is the Kago Kabari Seethe, the chest guy. As an enemy, mechanically, he's great. He doesn't attack, but runs away with his riches. He acts as a distraction, a risk versus reward. Leave your villagers so you can extract more crystals, or don't fall for the bait. Given that Demons and Dark Souls were created by a team of Japanese developers, This fool's gold idea seems to be a common one, and I quite like it. Anyway, the lore description on the Kagokabari, however, feels the least logical to me personally.
There once was a village with a mansion full of riches. One day a boy of lowly birth employed there heard rumors of the lord owner's secret stash of treasures. Struck with greed, the boy attempted to run off with a basket of riches, but was quickly caught by the other servants and executed. It is written that the basket clutched by the corpse of the young boy became shrouded in an ominous aura as it sprouted arms and legs. What the fuck? That, Dork, you just ruined my day with that shit, dude. You just fucking ruined my entire fucking Saturday, dude.
Jeez, I fucked Drew up. When I read the first sentence, I figured the greed on display would be the owner of the riches. No, instead it's the lowly boy, who hasn't ever had wealth in his life. Yes, he's greedy, so greedy that he embodies the sin, becoming a demon after he's slain with a basket of treasure. Don't get me wrong, I think the folklore is intriguing enough so that the combination of the visuals and the text make the Emma plaques a genuine prize for finishing a structure at the base, but it's hard not to feel a little shitty that the powers that be in this world, be it gods or not, have such irrational views on right and wrong. Besides those ones, the Enenra is great, as it disables Soh's commands until it's dead. You can't change roles or move villagers around. When you see that mark in the corner of the screen, you're on sword duty and sword duty only until you find him and take him out. It also likes to run away, being a little shit about the process, which is fun. I, at first, didn't like the Hozukime, as the explosion they dish out is extremely damaging, and it was kind of confusing deciphering if I was safe from it or not. Now it's obvious. Once their health bar reaches 0, they turn blue, and their explosion is then safe for you and the villagers, and damages the enemies instead. They turn into a hockey puck once they change colors, making them easy to slide around towards a group of foes. It's great. The last one I wanted to mention ties into the next topic of discussion. The Hidorugami is a type of Seethe that fly in and physically jam themselves onto a villager's face, forcibly placing this demon mask onto them. If successful, the villager who was possessed will have a big damage-dealing radius around them, except it hurts you and the other villagers, not the enemy. The villager that's corrupted moves wrong, mechanically and chaotically. It's brutal, horrifying, and the introduction to this demon is an example of the standout level variety Kunitsu-Gami offers. It attaches itself to Yoshiro, and when that happens, you turn into a spirit ball, your soul form, except unlike when this normally happens, when Soh loses all their health and revives after a length of time, you're stuck like this the whole level. You can't participate in the offense, so you'll need to rely on your villagers even more and build up your defenses in a smart way. There's a couple stages that have this gimmick of exclusively doling out the RTS tower defense gameplay, but there's also the opposite. During the graveyard level, there aren't any villagers to rescue, meaning you don't have any help, it's just you. This is the first time the traps are introduced, so you'll use those, along with Soh's sword swings, to keep the Seethe at bay. Now the focus is on tower defense and hack and slash. If you think about it, the boss has removed the tower defense aspect, making those emphasize RTS and hack and slash. It's amazing how much mileage you can get with a three-pronged genre fusion by just removing one of the gameplay styles now and again. RTS and tower defense only, tower defense and hack and slash only, RTS and hack and slash only. It's incredibly efficient. In the middle of the game, there's a level with a poison swamp all around. Hey, look at that, another Dark Souls. This was the biggest difficulty spike for my first playthrough. I failed more here than anywhere else. While that's a singular path you need to endure and get good enough to get through, there's plenty others that offer a branch where you'll get to choose which way you'll want to send Yoshiro. This helps both replayability and decision-making, as the length of each direction seems to be equal, but the structures nearby and terrain itself aren't. You might choose one for the Yoshiro offensive aura to help out, or the other for better vantage points for your archers. Playing it again for the optional objectives feels more enjoyable since you can try out the opposite side. There's 2 levels where it's total darkness and you'll need to worry about lighting lanterns so your villagers can see. Unless there's light on the enemy unit, your units can't attack them. It nullifies range fairly well when you don't have the right lanterns lit, and it's a cool looking stage in its own right. Possibly my favorite curveball the game throws out are the water levels. You have to hold out until dawn on a connected series of boats. There's a new enemy here, the raft that brings the ground Seethe to you, and after the enemies embark, or disembark depending on your point of view I guess, they glob onto the boat, and if left unattended, destroy it completely. You can melee attack the innards and save the vessel, but without a real health bar for the boat, it's sometimes a risky gambit if you didn't start the moment it latched on. Because there's 4 boats besides the main one, it's almost impossible to leave your units in a certain spot and watch them crush everything. On the second boat level especially, I found myself having to frequently reposition my marksmen to focus fire on the Hirafuge. There's cannons here too, which feel powerful and provide a great visual and audible feedback when pounding the enemy,
Pound that thing!
but they have a cooldown so you can't rely on them every time. Every level gimmick that shows up more than once sees the second iteration get a modification. There's an enemy that puts out the flame of your lit lanterns in the final darkness level, and the second river raft of destiny has lightning strikes. Great stuff. Finally, there's the base of the mountain level, the closest thing to a city biome so far. There's so many paths the demons can take on their way to get to you, and at first blush, it was quite perplexing. There's walls that I can't jump over? Well, the reveal when the Megagaki demolished those barriers was worth the confusion, holy shit. On New Game Plus, this was the toughest level in the entire game, and a big part of that was the tight alleyways mixed with gigantic enemies. Spamming marksmen isn't the silver bullet, as they don't have their range to take advantage of, given the many buildings blocking their view. Plus, the Bellbanger guys are a huge hassle, as they draw all ranged unit fire towards their invulnerable head, which is devious as hell. Anyway, the order of all these levels is top-notch, as nothing gets stale or repetitive, yet nothing feels grossly underutilized. Only a single Poison Swamp level is honestly exactly as many as the game needed, thanks. Whereas after I had the first one, I was praying for another Pitch Black Cave, another water level, and was delighted to see them pop up again. There's a good sense of forward momentum, even if you're traveling down the mountain as you go. The only exception is the clump of bosses in the beginning, since the back and forth of regular level, then boss fight, did feel like my progress was being halted each time. It smooths out after a while though, and doesn't become an issue again. It makes sense that there's so many bosses at the start, since that's how you acquire more villager roles. These are Seethe that have stolen their ceremonial masks, and embody their power, I suppose, so after they're defeated, you add the new one to your collection. Thematically it's perfect, but like I said, a slight hiccup in the pacing I think, in the beginning. In these boss fights, Yoshiro is still the fail state, and there are some encounters where placing your units in set areas to fire at range can be beneficial, but like I said before, these are mostly a break from the usual tower defense gameplay. All of the bosses are decent enough, and many become recurring mini-bosses for the regular levels, but there's a few standouts that don't, and those are the ones I want to talk about. The Yatsurao is a tree monster thing. I do think it's a bit of a letdown, keeping the elevator and these high up, like genuinely very tall heights to place your units exclusive to this single level, since it ends up turning into a boss fight basically immediately, and you then abandon that whole part of the terrain entirely, but even still, I liked how challenging this one was. You have to bait out its attacks correctly. If you're too far away, it might thrust its trunk right into Yoshiro, or if you're too close to her when the sock puppet branch comes out to play from underground, that might leave a poison pool nearby and dwindle her whole health bar away. An upgraded priest would be great right about now.
If I had one!
As much as I am fond of this boss fight, this level is home to 2 more annoying issues, so forgive me for dawdling. First of all, the game tricks you into wasting crystals, making a path for Yoshiro even though once the night starts, a cutscene plays, and cleansing the gate isn't the victory state anymore, the boss's death is. Super frustratingly, they also move where Yoshiro is located. If you didn't notice the random new placement she's in, you'll likely see her take damage, since your previously well-placed units are now protecting nothing, and Yoshiro will likely be wide open for attacks, losing health before you can catch up. One of the challenges for this stage is to keep Yoshiro from taking damage, so obviously this is going to get on some players' nerves, like myself. My other issue relates to the boss fight. When it starts, you're on the opposite side of the arena, and you'll need to avoid the sock puppet and Seethe to attack the weak points on the tree. I'm fine with this, but the boss hits so hard, you'll likely die before taking out the 3 orange tongue things, and then you respawn near Yoshiro on the other side, and just sit there until you're back in Soh form? At least you can take the units you have with you up the elevator to finish off the last remaining weak point, I guess, but it's quite demoralizing and underwhelming. I'd have rather restarted this mini solo encounter instead of being forced to do this or restart the whole night again. Anyway, yes, I do love this Cherry Blossom Tree boss, but it's also home to a lot of issues not found elsewhere. Raikobo is one of the better duels in the game. Lots of opportunities to parry and counterstrike here, but one of my favorite memories with him is my last battle, where I created a load of woodchoppers in case he did his lightning spire attack, since that one tended to hit Yoshiro on my first playthrough, and at the end of the fight, it felt more like a Pikmin encounter than anything else. Look at all these guys chop away. It's like I charged a group of red Pikmin at him. Incredible. My favorite boss in the game, however, has to be the Spider Dingus, Yatsukahagi. He throws a lot of heavy-hitting seed at you in the middle of the fight, and the best part is, he runs off, singing to himself as he goes, laughing when he's about to pounce on the player, and screams in horror when you destroy the Demon Gate, meaning he's open for attack. The music accompanying this fight is madness, a chaotic jazz piece that goes bananas, barely following a set pattern or melody. So much of the music in this game is phenomenal, but the boss themes are something special. The creators of the soundtrack talked about wanting to break the rules of video game music. They had the idea early on of giving every boss a different musical genre, and they said the quality tester was a bit baffled at the music choice initially for Yatsukahagi, but much like myself and probably many others, realized it was absolutely perfect. Jazz somehow works here. The other boss fight themes are great, of course, but none quite as memorable as this wild, wild theme to fit with this wild, wild west spider thing. After this is a boss rush of sorts, where all of the major festering Seethe, the ones that don't eventually show up as regular enemies in levels, are fought back to back in a single sitting. Something I haven't mentioned yet, since I'm not trying to analyze every inch of this game or we'd be here for an hour longer than we need to, is the Chozusha Basin, where you can, once per night, or in this case, once per boss, get a significant power boost to Soh and make them invulnerable for a time. By the way, many of these mechanics and moves I'm talking about, such as the parry and counterattack and Chozusha Basin, come from upgrading Soh, but I'm just assuming their upgraded form is the default for all of this. The basins, when planned right, can clean house, decimating the supposed intimidating enemy, and if you have your Soh attack talismans equipped, the many that increase their damage output, it gets even more ridiculous. Once you learn the tricks to the game well enough, you can breeze through what you thought was difficult previously, which is fun. The final boss of the game has two phases, two separate health bars. The Nanamagari's legs are goofy looking, and his seemingly random charges can really spell disaster for your units if you haven't soaked in how this guy operates. When defeated, all of your villagers get cocooned in a cutscene, and the Torigate head demon guy comes out to play for real. A one-on-one battle, and this one takes a while. He'll charge forward without much warning. You simply have to get used to the fact that once enough time passes without a new attack, he might rush into you, so have your dodge ready. He teleports around, so when you do have an opening to deal some damage, there might only be enough time for a single small combo. And his big ball attack is quite tedious. Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong, but I really don't know what I'm expected to do when it's out. Sometimes it'll collide into him and go away, but other times it'll phase through his body and keep existing until it decides to dart towards you finally. I don't have a problem with the spikes he throws down, or with managing both them and the ball at once, but since there's nothing to do with the ball except run around, it extends the length of this fight needlessly. Arrows don't cause it to explode, and I feel like I've tried blocking and dodging, but who knows, maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't find this phase especially hard anymore, especially after seeing New Game Plus all the way through, but I'd confidently say he's the most difficult out of everyone so far, and thus the fight feels properly climactic as a result. Something a bit exploitative about this phase is the Chozusha Basin buff. The game doesn't treat this as a single boss fight. You'll reload at this phase if you die and press continue. It even allows you to change your equipment. But the Chozusha Basins are supposed to be a 1 per night buff, or once per boss fight at the very least, and yet it's available when you load back in after a death. To be clear, on your successful attempt of the previous Chicken Walker phase, the Chozusha Basin doesn't reset. It'll remain deactivated in the Floaty Boy section if you're on that life still. Probably shouldn't complain. I bet a lot of people were thankful for this, especially going off how many threads I saw asking for advice on how to win against this guy. Before talking about what comes after this fight, we should discuss the narrative. I've seen people look down on Kunitsu-Gami for its story, of there not really being one, and I find that a bit sad. One of my favorite aspects about the story is how rarely it gets in the way. Besides a couple of the introductory cutscenes, the prologue, the voice lines after the tutorial, and then at the very end of the game, the epilogue, there aren't any lines of dialogue to be found. The most you'll get is Yoshiro saying, "take care," after you leave her tent in the home base, or her asking for Soh's help during the missions at night when the enemies get too close. The villagers don't talk, Yoshiro and Soh don't converse through spoken word, it's all visual storytelling. I can see why someone might not enjoy this style as much, opposed to a cast of characters interacting, with story beats playing out, but this is a tower defense game. Not trying to disrespect the genre, but the most this type of game could possibly do when it comes to the way it tells a story is clog up the airwaves during a level with voice lines, which might be economic, but it is rather tedious, or show cutscenes between stages. Maybe you feel differently, but I absolutely don't need every game I play to use up its runtime on story scenes when they most likely, 1, aren't very good, and 2, don't connect with the gameplay much anyway. The fact that there aren't miniature conflicts or characters to talk to with Yoshiro, Soh, and so on doesn't make this game worse by any means, and if anything, the less is more approach enhances the moments where things do explicitly happen. Time dedicated to an attempt at a satisfying story doesn't mean it's inherently time well spent. I'd gladly take no narrative over a poorly done one, but Kunitsu-Gami's narrative isn't poorly done. It's actually quite interesting. I'd say the story of Kunitsu-Gami is stronger than many, many other games I've played in the past few years, even some for this channel. It's fairly simple on its surface, sure. A maiden summons a protector to help the mountains fight off the demon invasion, and by the end, we succeed. But there's a surprising amount left up for interpretation, and it all starts with Yoshiro. You don't need to stretch your brain muscles to figure out what's happening with her as your journey goes along. If you've ever played a certain other game that many people know I love, and have mentioned a few times on the channel now and again, something similar happens with a character in it too, and this gave me the same vibes. We've seen moments, through cutscenes, hey look at that, where she's had difficulty moving forward, collapsed on the ground, the Seethe seeming to affect her body, and possibly her mind. Initially I viewed this as a way to gimmick the stage. Oh, I know, let's have a tower defense only level, where Soh is in spirit form the whole time, so... let's give a reason for that. Yoshiro is succumbing to the defilement, sure. Except, no, this was serving the narrative as much as it was serving the gameplay variety. This all culminates in one of the most moving scenes in the game, where it truly hit me, and the theme of community shone through even harder. At the start of the Kamukura shrine level, we see 2 cocoon villagers near a rickshaw, or more accurately, a jinrickshaw, the Japanese origin of the word, or even more accurately, as the lore implies, a mikoshi, a vehicle suited to transport a deity. The seat looked extravagant, but it wasn't until the defilement appeared to take hold of Yoshiro more that I started to worry. Another spirit form level, one of the best stages in the game altogether in my opinion, and afterwards the cocoon drivers get released and they pull the cart out. They help her on, and for the rest of the game, this is where she sits. The next level is the cherry tree boss fight, and once you've won the day, It's not as celebratory as usual. Yoshiro begins to crystallize. For the rest of the playthrough, Yoshiro will do her best, perform what she can of the ritual dance, supported by all of the villagers, the carpenter, her Mikoshi porters, and of course, Soh. It's clear that she's essentially sacrificing herself to help the mountain and its people, and in turn, the people are helping her in any way they can along the journey. It's beautiful in a way, but also tragic. Visiting Yoshiro in the home base and seeing her slowly become more crystal than human is a heartbreaking sight. The inclusion of the sweets doesn't feel so strange now. She's sacrificing so much, let her eat cake, as they say. After the victory over the spider boss, more Seethe energy seeps into Yoshiro, creeping up her face, and a peace breaks off. The villagers' reactions feel so sincere. They clearly admire and care for Yoshiro, and they're genuinely concerned for her. Upon defeat of the last boss, it finally happens. Yoshiro becomes completely crystallized, and we cut to the villagers bowing down to the Yoshiro that remains, a statue, and the mountain returning to its former glory. She gave up her life for the mountain, and the people revere her as a goddess in her own right. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sandwiched between the scenes I just showed is Yoshiro walking in the afterlife. She meets Soh, and their mask gets brushed aside to reveal Yoshiro's face? Who is Soh? Who is Yoshiro? The most concrete answers are found in the Emma plaques for both, but even still, their wording leaves room for questions. Soh says that Soh is the messenger of the mountain goddess, who governs and guides the world alongside Yoshiro, and it says both descended into the human world. Yoshiro says the mountain goddess bestowed unto her her life's purpose to guide the people of the mountain. The subtitle of the game is Path of the Goddess, but does this imply that Yoshiro is walking the path that was already walked by the goddess? Or could it mean that this path that Yoshiro is taking is her own, where she becomes the goddess to these people? The Emma plaque for Yoshiro says she represents humanity in the eyes of the gods, and represents gods in the eyes of humanity. I could see it both ways, Yoshiro being the goddess in the subtitle, or the goddess already existing and she's following her path, but something about the reveal that Soh was a woman, or at least resembled Yoshiro, made me question something else. The gender for Soh is left intentionally vague, using they-them the whole way through. The fun part about the English language is that this could mean two things, that they're intentionally trying to keep the gender hidden or ambiguous, or that the character is non-binary. You might brush this off as reading too into things, but something I began to notice more and more as the game kept going was how flat-chested Yoshiro is. There's nothing under those robes, just bare skin, and yet there's no hint of curves to be seen. Again, what's fun about this is, much like they-them, this could mean more than one thing. Is Yoshiro non-binary? Are they actually non-gendered? If the Soh reveal is meant to convey that this is Yoshiro to some degree, maybe the reveal isn't that Soh is a she, but that Yoshiro is a they. Yoshiro could also be a guy, and the usage of she and her, and maiden and goddess, was meant to throw us off. You can't rule that out completely, since they were clearly trying to throw us off the scent with Soh, even if you view this story and these characters as straightforward as can be. Perhaps gender discussions might be a boring topic for some, but it's not like it wasn't deliberate in some way. Even ignoring the pronouns used throughout the game, there's a gendered role for female and male, the shaman and sumo respectively, whereas every other villager role can be either one. If they didn't want you to think about the gender differences in the game, I doubt they would have featured two units that can only be occupied by one of the two presented. My other line of thinking had me questioning who the goddess actually is. You know who else walks the path of the goddess? Soh, they're the ones carving the dang thing in the first place. Is the subtitle hinting at Soh being the main character? We're already controlling them, sure, but perhaps this messenger of the mountain goddess is the goddess herself, helping these humans along. To explain why Soh resembles Yoshiro at the end, the wording of the beginning exposition, one of the only voiced parts of the entire narrative, presents Yoshiro as a person choosing to believe in the great mountain goddess, and devoting herself unto her. You could view this in line with the Emma plaque where she was sent down, but I feel like this conflicts a bit. It says both Yoshiro and Soh were sent down, and the wording makes it sound like that happened at the same time, but we see later they didn't. Yoshiro was there already, praying, and she summoned Soh later on. With all of that in mind, I feel like Yoshiro could just be a villager who resembles the goddess, and was chosen for the task for that reason at an early age, And the reveal shows more who Soh is, who you were, who the goddess is, than who Yoshiro is. Soh isn't resembling Yoshiro, Yoshiro is resembling Soh, if that makes sense. The Mikoshi Emma plaque does explicitly say, it said the Mikoshi was made long ago for when Yoshiro walks the path of the goddess, and while I initially thought that excluded some of my theories given its language, does it? I still think you could see it as any of the three. The path is Yoshiro's to take, her own, the path is Soh's to create, or the path is the mountain goddesses, who walked it previously, however long ago. There's one more unorthodox way to view this relationship, and it's one I'm quite fond of. Even with the revelations I received in New Game Plus, something about it seems so convincing. Yes, Yoshiro summons Soh, and yes, Soh resembles Yoshiro at the end, but what if they're the same person? Not different versions of herself, but the same entity the entire time. Something that could have been a coincidence to show how flowy and in sync they are, feels more significant the more I see it. After you fight the tutorial boss, it shows off Yoshiro and Soh doing their stuff, but don't their movements look similar, like exactly the same? Later on, you can unlock a Suba guard that produces a clone of sorts, mimicking your every action. What if this summoning incantation is of a similar effect? Yoshiro is the messenger of the goddess, and she splits herself, guiding her doppelganger's actions with her movements every night. She's been protecting herself from harm, she isn't defenseless at all. Something to add on to that theory, Soh fades into spirit form when Yoshiro is weakened, perhaps because they're connected by one mind? They have to be linked in some sort of way for that cause and effect to happen after all. The villagers all seem to respect Yoshiro, but don't pay much mind to Soh, even though they're the ones rescuing everyone and assigning them roles. You have to equip a separate talisman, one that eats up a slot for practically nothing, for the villagers to greet you. Is it because Soh is simply an extension of Yoshiro? You'd have to ignore Yoshiro calling out to Soh for help when danger is close, and you'd have to excuse Yoshiro's arm movements not mirroring yours while you have control of Soh in the stages, but this cutscene was so interesting upon revisiting that it hasn't left my head since. No interpretation is perfect, but given some of the details of New Game Plus, I think there is a more correct take on things, if you want to call it that. Something in the main ending, one I didn't focus on, points to something else going on. After Soh hands Yoshiro the mask, Soh vanishes, and Yoshiro is left there holding on to it, alone. The epilogue afterwards is voiced, the third time so far in the game, saying, no matter how many nights pass, human sin never wanes. When you click New Game Plus, you get a bit of flavor text. The pact with the mountain goddess is broken, and the world after awaits. It mentions a cycle of fortune and woe. The base game's final boss gets an Emma plaque too, and it has similar wordings. The pact of the mountain goddess, the lives of the people on the mountain threaten all other life that exists on it, and their lifestyle is what produces the defilement, throwing all life into chaos. The second phase lore just seems to raise more questions, asking what this being even is. I don't know, game, you tell me. I only bring this part up since Kunitsu-Gami, at many turns, seems to be encouraging the open for interpretation mindset. After you go through the entire game again, once you defeat the previous final boss, there's one more, Cursed Soh, a mirror matchup, as a finale and reward for finishing New Game Plus. I won't discuss this fight right now, but it had to be mentioned so I could talk about the Emma plaque for it. It says Cursed Soh is an otherworldly being that governs the people of the mountains from the heavens. It speaks about how humanity was cursed for their defiling of the mountain, and the villagers' ancestors made a promise to the goddess that as long as they worshipped and respected her, they'd be allowed to live peacefully. It says humanity's defilement creates an image that echoes as if reflected in a mirror, resonating tens of thousands of times. The ending cutscene of New Game Plus is quite different as well, painting a picture that makes us view our first playthrough a little differently. After you defeat Cursed Soh, our Soh goes up to Yoshiro and breaks the defilement away from her, then turns into spirit form, presumably returning to the heavens or maybe even dissipating away. The crystals all get shared around in the village, put into the same style of boxes that you found the talismans in throughout the game, and Yoshiro dances the day away. It's actually kind of amazing. I'll show her dancing for a bit. After the credits, we get our fourth unique cutscene that has spoken word, acting as an epilogue to the entire game, not just the first playthrough. She starts by saying, "And so concludes the battle fought across generations." I think this is really all the evidence one needs for this theory. The maiden, Yoshiro, becomes the next cycle Soh. This has happened many times before, the battle against the Seethe, and every time the humans win, and every time the previous maiden who was chosen gets handed the reins for next time. One of the scrolls you can view, which just has a visual element to it, no lore text, shows Yoshiro next to skeletons, seemingly being given the position of something. Maybe divine messenger? I don't quite understand how the crystallized statue of Yoshiro fits into this, but perhaps we can assume that the penultimate cycle, the first playthrough, went wrong somehow. Maybe the villagers' reactions weren't out of empathy, but out of confusion and surprise. I'd imagine the previous incarnations of the maiden would be expected to die, and be put wherever the image gives us a view of, but then again, maybe I'm wrong, and there's many maiden statues around, and we only see this one. While I am satisfied with the cyclical nature of it all being mostly set in stone, or crystal I should say, the Cursed Soh fight itself still leaves me guessing. In the first playthrough, Soh slices the end boss, and it vanishes, going into Yoshiro. In New Game Plus, Soh slices it, and it remains, birthing something else entirely, this shadowy figure. It seems to threaten Yoshiro, and then takes residence in the shrine. If we're on board with the cycle-breaking narrative, then it's the previous Yoshiro as Soh right now, protecting the next incarnation, and Cursed Soh is the goddess herself. At least I think. The Emma plaque does say Cursed Soh is a being that governs the people of the mountains from the heavens, but so does Soh's. It has almost the exact wording, guides and governs the world of chaos. The lore of Cursed Soh mentions reflections in a mirror resonating tens of thousands of times. Is this the accumulation of the defilement of all human sin of every cycle, taking on the form of Soh? It's one of those two, I imagine, but the one I find to be more fitting is that Cursed Soh is the mountain goddess herself, coming down in an act of extended cruelty, since fighting gods is sort of a common trope in Japanese video games, and it fits far more thematically in my mind. Yes, humans are said to disrupt the land with their destruction and sin, and that's what birthed many of the demons in the first place, but regardless of the reason, the mountain goddess is the one choosing to fuck shit up every now and then, otherwise what's the point of the Pact of the Goddess? It's not said how long a cycle is, 10 months, 3 years, a century, nobody knows for sure, but it doesn't look to me like humans are being all that shitty, and even if they were, the horrors found in the lore entry still go way too far, and some even allude to the fact that demons and gods are basically one and the same. In my preferred reading of this narrative, I'm not sure why Cursed Soh comes down to visit, but it feels vengeful and cold-hearted, as if she's upset the humans have won so many times. Soh stepping up to the plate and putting it all on the line, leave the humans alone for good if I defeat you right now, is exactly the kind of bravery and confidence they've been showing with their actions throughout the entire game. I'd like to believe this really is the end of the Seethe infestation, that the mountain is no longer cursed, otherwise the Yoshiro dance doesn't symbolize as much, it doesn't feel as powerful or freeing. In a way, this still does feel like a sacrifice, but again, a sacrifice from the previous cycle's Yoshiro. The villagers can help out in this fight, absolutely, but New Game Plus Soh, presumably previous Yoshiro, vanishes. If it wasn't vengeful, and this really was what was expected of her, since the Seethe invasion wasn't done yet after the final former boss this time, the shrine isn't free of danger, then the goddess is especially cruel to this version of Yoshiro. Or maybe this has something to do with the crystallization of the previous cycle's maiden, who knows. All of this is so speculative, so forgive me for sounding so wishy-washy in this video. So much of the lore presented could be taken a few different ways, and it's unclear if it was intentional ambiguity, if it came down to a slight mistranslation, or even just the punctuation not being right in a few places. Seriously, the addition of a comma in some spots on the Emma plaques could completely reshape my current view of things. There's also the brief text that's displayed prior to every stage, but it's only there before you finish it. That won't show up again when redoing a level, or in New Game Plus for some reason. For instance, I didn't notice until the very end of my time editing this video that the Kamakura Shrine one says that the goddess once descended upon this place. That drop of information could have meant something to me when I was piecing this together, but now it's just a footnote. I've seen other people's interpretations on things, and what I presented is what I think fits best. The only outlier that makes me wonder if everything I said is wrong comes at the end of the game. Not New Game Plus, the first playthrough. It looks like Soh's feet, like they're in the physical world still, and they walk away. Are they alive in this version, where Yoshiro gets to be alive in the other? Not sure, but either way, whatever view you have of the finale and the details of who's who and what's actually going on, it's far more engaging than some other games that spend too much time on their story. Anyway, now we can talk about Cursed Soh, the boss fight. First off, the room you enter is a visual delight, with its colors and overall atmosphere. It's like you're in a kaleidoscope, which makes sense, since this imagery is identical to what was shown when Yoshiro first summoned Soh at the start. A coincidence? Absolutely no chance. This encounter gave me Majora's Mask vibes, with the non-existent dream space setting. Cursed Soh himself looks vaguely similar to the fierce deity, with the color design at least, and when the fight starts, Cursed Soh tries to use the 12 divine masks against you. If you say you don't see the Majora similarities, I think you're a liar. Yoshiro seems to be the one to weaken Cursed Soh, removing the 12 masks, which, in all likelihood, is why the villagers are able to help out in this fight. Even with them all there, in all sorts of different configurations, they aren't going to completely carry you or save you. Cursed Soh is the hardest boss in the game by orders of magnitude. Their health bar is massive. The combination of the Chozusha Basin and all of your special attacks in a row, including a critical hit, basically only does a quarter of their health bar, and that's when the fight is the easiest. As it goes on, Cursed Soh shows more familiar attacks and special moves. At the start, it's mostly equal, but even still, they pack a ridiculous punch. They have the same Oka dance combos, which are easy to dodge and work around, but they can also parry you, counterattack, and perform a critical strike when your resist gauge is empty, and that will likely insta-kill you. That's nothing compared to the next phases, though, as once they get their bow, things start to get a lot more challenging. Multi-arrows that deal a crazy amount of damage to you and your villagers. Many types too, so the speed and effect of them changes by the color, and you have to react at the right time. Eventually they'll pull out their doppelganger, much like you can if you unlock a certain Suba guard, and this is when the fight gets insanely difficult. They both hit so hard, and it's tough to focus on either of them when the other can do a random lunging special attack, which is maybe something I haven't unlocked, otherwise it's unique to them, and they can fire arrows at you at a moment's notice. Marksmen weren't the answer here, which is good. I'm glad I had to fine-tune and figure things out. In the end, I went with spreading cannons, ranged units, and sorcerers around so they wouldn't all die by a few attacks in a clump. The sorcerer's nuke doesn't knock off a giant chunk of their health bar or anything, but it's something that'll passively charge up as you fight, and eliminates the clone Cursed Soh with one click, so it's definitely helpful. My successful attempt was honestly pure luck. I had one sorcerer left, and he somehow stayed alive long enough for me to get a few uses out of him. The music, when nearing the end, starts to get more sentimental, transitioning into a very moving piece. But since the final third of the health bar is where Cursed Soh is at their strongest, it wasn't great hearing it so early, especially on those failed attempts. Oh, am I supposed to be wrapping this battle up? Is this the Oscar speech wrap it up song kicking in? Sorry, just fighting for my life here, no big deal. It's overall a very well put together fight, and a tremendous end to a magical game. It's incredible how well the melee combat portion of the game holds up, since this doesn't at all feel like a typical action game. So much focus is on the tower defense and RTS side that it almost seems ludicrous and unfair that Kunitsu-Gami can excel in one half of what it's trying to do more than most even meet expectations in their entirety. You aren't just getting the hack and slash, although that is a fantastic aspect of the game, you're getting it all. Strategy, community, base building, tower defense, interesting lore, a speculative but still engaging narrative, an audio-visual feast, and a passion from the designers that shines through at every turn. This is what we need more of from big developers. This is published and developed by Capcom, the studio that seems to only focus on Resident Evil and Monster Hunter. And Okami 2, hell yeah. This is a breath of fresh air, and it's a shame it didn't get noticed much. Maybe this video will convince a few of you out there to give it a go, and if so, I hope you enjoy it and go with the flow, dancing under the moonlight as Soh, with Yoshiro in tow. Okay, I'll stop. thanks so much for watching, everyone. This wasn't supposed to be a long video, it really wasn't. I'm sorry I had so much to say about this awesome game. Please consider subscribing to the channel and becoming a member, either on YouTube or on Patreon. You can sign up for free on Patreon to at least get my monthly updates, where I discuss the games I've played that month, so might as well give that a go, huh? Otherwise, paid members, both YouTube and Patreon, get videos a few days to a week early. How cool, right? I know I said Dying Light 2 will be next, but I lied. I'm a filthy liar. Bear with me, it's a long game. I'm trying my best. Okay, that's all I got. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.